Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our presentation, Listening with Body and Mind, Using Visuals and Movement to Enhance Ear Training. My name is William Whipple, and I teach at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, and I teach piano pedagogy and group piano class and oral theory 1 and 2 and piano ensemble. And I'm happy to co-present today with my dear friend, Brandon Bascom. Brandon?
Hi there, I'm Brandon Bascom. I teach at Fresno City College. I teach group piano, I teach applied piano lessons, I teach piano pedagogy, and I teach ear training, theory, and finale. So I just wanted to make mention that I have put our handout on my personal website. You can get it on MTNA's website as well, brandonbascom.com/handouts. And some of the charts that I will be sharing will be there as well.
All right, well, let's get started.
This is what we're going to address today: the why, the what, and the how. Adding visuals and movement to our instruction of oral theory, or for that matter, any topic really, is beneficial for our students, for all of our students. Teaching with visuals and movement fall into a multisensory or multimodal approach to learning. So first, the why. Why are visuals and movement beneficial? Why should we be thinking about these concepts as teachers, and why is it important and relevant? We'll also discuss the how. How do we make sure that we as educators are implementing a multisensory, multimodal approach to our teaching, and really on a daily basis? And then we'll also spend time on the what, and we'll spend most of the presentation today on the what. What types of visualizations can we use? What types of movement exercises or games can we use to help us in the classroom and to help our students? So first, the why. Why are visuals and movement beneficial for our students? Multisensory or multidimensional learning can add to the overall understanding of music, and this understanding can be applied by many different people and perspectives, truly our neurodiverse population. So when we layer on multiple modalities within a single topic, our students gain a deeper understanding of that topic. Each of us don't just have one style of learning, we have multiple pathways. We can turn to Howard Gardner and his multiple intelligences theory, his MI theory, to support this idea. Gardner states, the standard view of intelligence held since the beginning of the century by most psychologists is that there is a single intelligence. We are born with it, we can't change it very much, and psychologists can measure it with a simple instrument. I feel that each of these claims is wrong, and I can draw on biological, cross-cultural, and psychological evidence to show how it is wrong. I argue that all human beings, because of our species membership, are capable of at least 8 or 9 different ways of representing the world, our so-called multiple intelligences. And notice, multiple intelligences theory is plural, intelligence is plural. So here is Howard Gardner in his own words describing his MI theory.
We have schools because we hope that someday when children have left schools that they will still be able to use what it is that they've learned. And there is now a massive amount of evidence from all realms of science that unless individuals take a very active role in what it is that they're studying, unless they learn to ask questions, to do things hands-on, to essentially recreate things in their own mind and then transform them as is needed, the ideas just disappear. The student may have a good grade on the exam, we may think that he or she is learning, but a year or two later, there's nothing left. If, on the other hand, somebody has carried out an experiment himself or herself, analyzed the data, made a prediction and saw whether it came out correctly, if somebody is doing history and actually does some interviewing himself or herself, oral histories, then reads the documents, listens to it, go back and asks further questions, writes up a paper, that's the kind of thing that's going to adhere, where if you simply memorize a bunch of names and a bunch of facts and even a bunch of definitions, there's nothing to hold on to. The idea of multiple intelligences comes out of psychology. It's a theory that was developed to document the fact that human beings have very different kinds of intellectual strengths, and that these strengths are very, very important in how kids learn, and how people represent things in their minds, and then how people use them in order to show what it is that they've understood. If we all had exactly the same kind of mind and there was only one kind of intelligence, then we could teach everybody the same thing in the same way and assess them in the same way, and that would be fair. But once we realize that people have very different kinds of minds, different kinds of strengths, some people are good in thinking spatially, some people are good in thinking language, other people are very logical, other people need to do hands-on, they need to actually explore actively and to try things out. Once we realize that, then an education which treats everybody the same way is actually the most unfair education, because it picks out one kind of mind, which I call the law professor mind, somebody who's very linguistic and logical, and says, if you think like that, great. If you don't think like that, there's no room on the train for you.
And Brandon and I talk about the topic Gardner was addressing in the beginning of this video. We talk about it all the time. Are we giving our students, our piano students, our music major students, the tools they need to go out and be working pianists or being working musicians, and are they retention? Are they retaining these tools after they graduate? And I think teaching our students with multiple modalities will help with this issue. Teaching in what Gardner calls the pluralistic approach to understanding. Gardner states we should pluralize. The more different ways we can give to them, students, the more we can pluralize, the better. And so he has put a label to this idea of understanding a topic in a multimodal way, and that is pluralistic. So here's a more recent interview with Howard Gardner from a few years ago.
But there's something one could always do if one wanted to do and one knew how to do it, and that was to pluralize. What is pluralization? I begin with the notion that nobody can teach everything anymore. If they ever could, they certainly can't now. So we have to decide what's really important, and we have to focus in our classes, whether they're in person or online or even in books, we have to focus on things that are really important, things which are central to disciplines, which are central to occupations. And then we should pluralize, and that means we should present the material in more than one way. We shouldn't just talk about it as I am today, because we have limited time.
And as I am today, merely talking to you in a direct style because of limited time. Although later in this presentation, I'm going to ask you to actually clap some rhythms, so that would be using a bodily kinesthetic or even a filling your space, a visual spatial intelligence. So we'll get out of this direct style here in a minute. This interview, and I have the link here provided for you at the bottom if you wanted to come back to this slide and find the link to the full interview with Howard Gardner. Fascinating 50 minutes with him. He talks about pluralism. He also mentions possible new intelligences, existential intelligence, which has been around for a while, big picture intelligence. But he also mentions a pedagogical intelligence being added to the mix. And he actually uses musicians as an example for the pedagogical intelligence. And he cites the fact that one could have two outstanding performing musicians, however one can teach and the other can't. So I'll leave this slide here and the link to the full interview in case you wanted to come back and watch the whole thing. All right, now the how. How can we make sure that we're following a pluralistic approach to understanding? And I think the best way is to overtly and proactively include multimodal, multisensory activities and exercises into our lesson plans. So here is my lesson plan. And this is what I use for every single class that I teach for planning, and also for individual lessons as well. And I see lesson planning in general, most in group classes. However, they are also for one-on-one lessons, and I don't see it that much being used for one-on-one applied lessons, but they're really for both. And Frances Clark actually talks about this in her book, Questions and Answers, Practical Advice for Piano Teachers, when she states, making the plan for the student's next week lesson can be done best the morning after the lesson. when it is still fresh in our minds. She goes on to say, planning a lesson consumes about as much time as giving it. So this is how I make sure that I'm not just teaching in what's called the direct style, where I'm the only one talking. We have to get away from this mindset 100% of the time. And so I have a box, it's highlighted here, and it's dedicated to multimodal and multisensory exercises. So let's say, for as an example, that on the agenda for a class is whole steps and half steps. Well, in the multimodal, multisensory box, I can have that they are looking at them with written with a pencil and paper, but also I can have on there that they are singing them with hand signs that they are pointing to, and also we step them. So we step when we feel the difference between a whole step or a half step with our feet, as well as singing it. So all these things keep me honest and they tell me that I'm fulfilling the multimodal, multisensory requirement that I have for myself. All right, the what. This is where we're going to spend most of our time. What types of visuals can one use? What type of movement exercises can be incorporated? So a couple of wonderful resources here. Keep in mind first that we're only talking about two approaches to understanding a concept in a pluralistic way. We're the visual spatial, which is one way of perceiving the world that can occur through a visual observation of the world. And some would actually argue that that visuals are the only path toward critical thinking. So Gardner explains this in his book, Frames of Mind. While images are typically seen as helpful aids to thinking, some commentators have gone much further, deeming visual and spatial imagery as a primary source of thought. So Gardner is referring to psychologist Rudolf Arnheim, who taught at Harvard and later at Michigan, and his book Visual Thinking. So Gardner continues, Arnheim argues that the most important operations of thinking come directly from our perception of the world, with vision serving as the sensory system par excellence, which undergirds and constitutes our cognitive processes. And as he puts it, the remarkable mechanisms by which the senses understand the environment are all but identical with the operations described by the psychology of thinking. Truly productive thinking in whatever area of cognition takes place in the realm of imagery. So Arnheim suggests that unless we can conjure up an image of some process or concept, we will be unable to think clearly about it. For movement, a wonderful book that has many, many examples, exercises to try out is called The Moving Body in the Oral Skills Classroom. And it is written by Diane Urista. She teaches at Cleveland Institute of Music and is a former student of Professor Bob Abramson, and who taught at Manhattan School of Music for a number of years, Juilliard, and his own school in New York City. Urista explains music and movement is the development of communication between the brain, which perceives and analyzes, and the body, which performs, in neuromuscular system of kinesthetic sense. Doing so, 1, trains performers to express more effectively, through their bodies, the musical ideas that are in their minds, and 2, opens students' perception to finer degrees of expressive nuance in the music. Movement to music stimulates all the capacities we use to engage in music. The oral, visual, tactile, and muscular senses. Furthermore, the approach cultivates an active, cooperative learning environment in which students can learn by experimentation and from each other. So let's get into some examples that I like to use and that I have found effective in the classroom and individual lessons. As Urista stated, a lot of these exercises or games can fit into both categories of visualizations and movement. So a great place to start, I think, is with rhythm. We must think rhythm first, so let's begin with clapping. Clapping a rhythm. Very basic, probably one of the first things that we learned to do even before we learned note types or values. So perhaps using a drum to simply keep a steady beat. And I know my almost 2-year-old daughter is doing that recently, using a drum to keep a pretty steady beat, and she's matching pitch, and and she's singing Twinkle Twinkle with us, and I could go on for a long time. So clapping falls into a visual and movement modality. So if you would right now, if you don't mind, for those of you watching, take a look at the bottom line here of this Little Sonatina by Bill and Pat Medley. Just the bottom line, and you can push pause, but can you clap and count? Just the bottom line here. Go ahead and push pause. All right, welcome back. I would venture to guess that your clapping looked something like this.
1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, was I correct? Clapping in a musical way is very, very important, and I spent a lot of time on this with my students because it's so ingrained in them that they should clap in the way that my student did here in the first video. But I think everything that we do should be as musical as possible. So I much prefer this way of clapping.
1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So something as simple as circles can make it so much more musical. Faster the tempo, the smaller the circles have to be. Slower the tempo, and we can do bigger circles. So the idea here is that the movement matches the sound. So a half note, for example, the sound is still sustaining on beat 2, and for piano it's decaying, but think of a singer and we'd sustain it with breath support. But the sound is still there. So our hand motions should also still be moving to represent that sound and what we should be listening to. A melody's still a melody on beat 2, even though we may not have played the note on beat 2. So this movement relates to hearing the sound and the circles and hearing a note all the way through until its completion. Next, we have a game that I like to play, and I use a lot of games out of this book called Rhythm Games for Perception and Cognition. Fabulous book by Professor Robert Abramson. As I mentioned, taught at MSM, Manhattan School of Music for many years, and then Juilliard, and then his own school in New York City. Wonderful book. And Abramson stated that these games, quote, are designed to help students of all ages develop rapid and accurate connections between the ears that listen, the brain that analyzes, and the body that acts to interpret the messages encoded in the music. The music does the teaching, and the teacher simply acts as a model and a coach. So the progression of these games is, quote, from movement in place to the more difficult movement in space, from movement of the hands, fingers, arms, shoulders, and torso to movement of the legs and feet. Games using balls, sticks, and beanbags are used in the early games to avoid self-consciousness about body movement in front of other people. So I totally agree, completely agree, and I have used this progression that Professor Abramson has laid out here, and I think it has really helped. And I've never had a student complain about doing movement exercises because they felt embarrassed. And I think it's because I followed this idea of movement, from movement in place to movement in space. We gradually get into it. So, and I always use props. And I know some are very much against the use of props since it's an extension of one's body and not 100% use of just our bodies. But pedagogically speaking, I think it has helped. It has made students feel more comfortable. And even in college, some of my freshmen come to me and they have never sung in front of others. And then you tell them that they're going to be moving around the room in front of others, and, well, that can be very, very, very scary for them. So movement in place really helps to start, and then we move into movement in space. So this game, Can You Stop, Can You Start, is a movement in place game, although you can tweak any of these, and I don't follow the directions completely. I've tweaked it to make it my own, so you could actually make this game however you like, but I am doing it as a movement in place sort of game. I'm particularly thankful for movement in place type games, especially now, as I'm teaching mostly in person with social distancing. So movement in place we can do in a classroom. Movement in space is a lot harder, and we haven't been able to do it because there just isn't enough room to keep the social distancing. So I'm very grateful for movement in place type games and exercises. Let's watch.
One, two, three, four.
Six,
One, two, three, four, five, six.
two,
One, two.
five,
One, two, three, four, five.
Okay, so the teacher keeps a steady beat, either on a drum or improvising on the piano, or playing a piece from a score, it's fine. And they give a verbal cue. This time I used the word eep. And that cues the student to start clapping after they've listened to it in the same tempo. Teacher then calls out a random number from 1 to 10, and the student counts that number out loud in the same tempo. The regular clapping continues until the next number is called. So back and forth. Abramson also includes the why, or the purpose for each of these exercises in his entire book, which I really, really appreciate. So this game is for developing coordination, quick reaction, and a feeling for the precise measurement of silence. So Eurista defines quick reaction as, quote, adapting and responding to musical change while retaining a sense of mental calm. How we react to unpredictability is the basis of a quick reaction exercises. In such an exercise, we learn to respond quickly and effortlessly to a musical change, elicited by a musical or verbal cue. Listening for the unexpected cues requires us to stay focused. There are so many things we can do to make these exercises our own. Variations on this include different tempi, adding conducting instead of clapping, add actual moving around the room, movement in place, to movement in space. Now we have this quote here, tone deaf, there's no such thing. And this comes from a quote from Helen Lanford's book called The Music Within Us. And if you don't know this book, you really should, because it's absolutely fantastic. It's full of multisensory exercises you should try with your students. Tune yourself like a violin is in this book, and Lanford uses it as a visual, spatial, and bodily kinesthetic exercise when students weren't quite able to sing on pitch. Personally, I use this quite a bit for students who are not able to match pitch. Lanford had students visualize themselves as a violin and had them tune up their instrument, their body, to the correct pitch. Here's what this looks like. So Lanford stated, people are not always aware of how much they depend on the visual while listening, even in music. I find these exercises very similar to vocal sirens, so just with the added visual of tuning yourself like a violin. Next we have singing with dyads with hand signs and singing trichords with hand signs. So when working on whole steps and half steps, which I spend quite a bit of time with my students on, I have my students sing dyads and trichords with corresponding hand signs. Here's what that looks like.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Those are the dyads. Here are the trichords.
1, 2, 3, Ionian. 1, 2, 3, Dorian. 1, 2, 3, Phrygian.
So as you could see, I have them point to their hand signs as they sing, singing with numbers and also the mode. There's something about this visualization and movement. They're not just singing, they're having something concrete to point to. They are feeling it with their bodies and pointing with their arms and their fingers. The visualization creates an automatic response as they have truly connected the hand-signed picture or the shape with a whole step or a half step. So when I first started teaching, I didn't use these. But once I started using these visualizations and hand signs, I saw a higher success rate for students singing the trichords and diads. Tetrachords follow after trichords in Oral Theory 2 for my classes. And lastly, taking visualizations and bodily kinesthetic learning to another level, I require my Oral Theory 2 students to perform a music and movement project. And I suppose one may call this plastic anime. I simply call it music and movement. And students were given a few guidelines for this project. They were to select a piece of music and they were allowed to use any genre. And I gave them a time limit. They were to represent the music through physical gestures, and the gestures must match the music. I asked for one section to involve a free improvisation, and overall the movement must tell a story. And that's really it. And here's one group's project, and this is what they came up with using Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade. And I should preface this that these students had never done anything like this before. And they took it seriously, but they also added humor too, and that's really what it's all about. It's having a fun way of learning, using bodily kinesthetic and their spatial surroundings, visual surroundings. And I was very, very proud of them. So here is their project. So complete with a selfie at the very, very end. I thought they did a good job, and they had fun doing it. So at this point, I'll turn things over to Brandon. Brandon?
Thank you, Bill. I want to share some quotes from Michael R. Rogers' book, Teaching Approaches in Music Theory, an overview of pedagogical philosophies. This was the textbook used for the theory pedagogy class by Karen Fournier that I took at the University of Michigan. Many teachers out there probably haven't had the opportunity to take such a class, yet many of us are teaching things like music theory, ear training, and sight singing. I'm so grateful I took that course. I had no plans on teaching any sort of theory, ear training, or musicianship. But 2 weeks before my first day of class at my first teaching job, I was assigned to teach basic musicianship by my dean. So I want to share some quotes from this book. The first quote is, "Ear training programs ultimately show their worth in their ability to teach students how the listening process itself operates." This quote could easily be changed to include individual or private teachers also being ear training teachers ultimately show their worth in their ability to teach students how the listening process itself operates. Rogers also says more important even than getting the right note or answer is learning how to hear a sound in its contextual relationship and knowing its meaning. He also says music theory has only one goal: to understand what we hear. Rogers reiterates the student being able to hear musical patterns and the sound into notes and notes into sound transference when he quotes Benward, who spoke of the seeing ear and the hearing eye. Rogers takes Benward's one step further, describing the understanding ear and the hearing mind. Rogers also quotes Howard A. Murphy from his book, Teaching Musicianship, and he says, "Listening, in all degrees of intensity, is a mental activity dependent only, in a very general sense, upon actual physical hearing. This is shown by the facts that animals hear as well as humans. In fact, it is known that certain animals hear much more acutely. But for animals, musical sounds are totally without musical meanings. Only through mental activity do musical sounds become meaningful. The mind selects, organizes, and clarifies what no human ear receives. Ear training is mind and sense training. The ear catches aural sensations, but the mind evaluates, discriminates, and identifies what was heard. We hear with our ears, but we listen with our minds. It is a combination of intuition and knowledge. It includes remembering what we heard in the past and anticipating that which is to follow. For example, listening is memory plus anticipation plus critical discrimination. It is hearing the present in relation to the past and the future. These considerations imply that listening can be improved and developed consciously. Aside from comparatively rare physical or psychological defects, there is no such thing as a bad ear for music. There are only untrained minds." I like the descriptive words that Murphy uses, the things that are actually going on. Some of our students just don't know that these things are going on or that these things need to be happening. We must organize, clarify, and discriminate what we hear. Some of the activities Bill talked about reminded me of some of the games and activities Rogers suggests to use in classrooms. One of the way he mentions is to have a spelling bee. This can be used with either a rhythm example or with a sight singing example. If the student can perform the example, they stay in the spelling bee, but if they miss, they are out. He also mentions a musical chairs format where I assume he eliminates wrong answers as he goes. Rogers mentions multiple choice recognition. You would provide students with 4 slightly different answers, A, B, C, and D, for a melody that are slightly different. A slightly more challenging option is to add an additional choice, E, none of the above. This keeps the students honest on the multiple choice options. And these are really great for online teaching situations that are happening right now. Here are some simple quadruple rhythms that you could use for a spelling bee environment. On the next slide are some compound duple meter rhythmic examples that could be used to challenge some more students. My colleague David Taylor from Brigham Young University, Idaho, created a chart that was a multiple choice rhythmic recognition chart. I'd like to share a video clip of me using this in a classroom setting. All right, so this is beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, and beat 4. And I'm going to play a 4-beat measure, and you have to figure out what the answers are. Are you ready? This should be fun. Total low stress, V. No worries. 1, 2, ready, go. One more time. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Wait, we're supposed to say which ones you played?
Eventually, but not right now.
Oh, okay.
You can mark them on your version, or just write down the letters. 1, 2, ready, go. Last time, and then we'll go over the answers. 1, 2, ready, go. What did I get?
A, B, C, and A.
ABBA, my favorite band. Just kidding. All right, yes, A, B, B, A. You ready for a new one? Does everybody see what's going on now?
It's gonna be AC/DC next.
You think? Should we try that? AC/DC, here we go. There we go. All right, here we go. 1, 2, ready, go. Second time. 1, 2, ready, go. Who's got it?
B, C, B, C.
Check it. 1, 2, ready, go.
B, C, C, and C.
No.
B, C, A, D.
B, C, C, D. B, I mean.
Peace new banana, banana, bull. Okay, so Rogers talks about the mental set. How does what we listen for affect what we will or can hear is the main question to be pursued in ear training class. Psychologists would call this the listening attitude or mental set, a perceptual adjustment for a certain kind of activity. Ron describes the job of music theory as creating and refining mental filters through which sounds pass to become organized as music, and defines this process with the delightful term constructive brainwashing. Rogers says of recognition, while recognition of isolated events is subsidiary to listening to real music, it can develop certain useful skills such as discrimination, comparison, and concentration habits that are useful and important for any kind of hearing activity. Recognition is also valuable because it avoids the problem of dealing with notation and music reading. thereby breaking down the listening process into manageable parts. Recognition is defined then as the identification of sound fragments by symbol or label, a perfect fourth or a major triad, etc., independently of written notation. So I've created an interval flow chart, and I've used this to help students discriminate, like was talked about by Rogers, to help them discern what they really are hearing. This chart was designed for the student to answer questions that will hopefully help them find the correct answer. I want to mention, on Zoom, there's an annotate button that allows me to draw right on my screen. So if I'm in near training class, I will use this and play an interval and ask the questions as I go. Is it dissonant? Is it close, middle, or far? Is it grinding? And hopefully we've answered all the questions correct and find the right answer. Here's a video clip of a quiz I made in an online video that anyone can do on their own at home. One of the visual elements that I used was a halo over the mouse cursor as I go throughout the quiz, highlighting the answers to the questions going through the flow chart. All right, in this video, I'm going to give an interval quiz. I will play each interval between a minor second and an octave. I have up here an interval flow chart to help you distinguish which interval I'm playing based on a few questions. Is it dissonant? Is it grinding? Is it close, middle, or far? Or is it more consonant? And that will take you through each side of the flow chart to find out which interval you are hearing. I will also do a mouse highlight to help you through that flow chart after I've played each interval. I'll play each interval 4 times, 2 times harmonically and 2 times melodically. Here's the first one. Number 2. Hollow because the third is missing. We don't know if it's major or minor. I like to use the chat feature of Zoom and have students send their answers as private messages in the chat. I like to do this because I can make sure that the students aren't blurting out the answer so everyone else sees. Those that feel kind of apprehensive about answering can feel free to answer, and I don't call them out by name if they are wrong. If they are right, I say, "Good job, Max. Good job, Connor." If they are wrong, I say, "Check it" or "Try again," and I don't mention them by name. Rogers says, the overuse of familiar tunes as a crutch should be discouraged, although experimenting with various scale degree combinations can easily demonstrate the multiple functional possibilities for any interval. I do give my students a song chart, but as Rogers says here, crutches, and the goal of crutches, is to get off of crutches. and to heal and be able to walk on your own. We want our students to be able to listen on their own and give correct answers. While I do use some songs for some intervals, I try not to overuse those songs. Rogers also mentions that almost any interval can have multiple functional possibilities and can be made to sound stable, tension-provoking, compressed, expanding, etc. So some of the ways I hear things are not necessarily the way my students hear them. And I mention that to students. If you hear it another way, great. Go with how you are able to hear it. I've created the same idea for seventh chord identification. This flowchart asks some similar questions. Is it dissonant? Yes or no? How dissonant is it? There are some idiosyncratic terms like tangy. To me, the major seventh chord is tangy. Again, Apple sorting cart here, with questions for students to really pay attention and discriminate what they are listening to, and get into the habit of listening crucially for what they are hearing. Another gamification I like to use is clickers, sometimes called classroom response devices, where I poll my class. This is also beneficial to me as an instructor, as I can instantly see how the class is doing and what intervals they are or are not recognizing, or a concept that they are not understanding that I need to spend more time reinforcing. And that's one of the reasons that I really love to use clickers. Here is a clip of me using clickers in class. Who didn't vote? There we go. Come on, kids. Only one note wants to move. Augmented. Number 5. Ooh, 88%. That's a B. Major. I'd also like to mention a program I use called Classroom Maestro that is advantageous for the visual learner. Classroom Maestro comes from Time Warp Technologies. I have a MIDI instrument connected, but you can use it with or without a MIDI instrument. You can use it with or without analysis. You can turn the keyboard on or off. You can turn the staff on or off. You can use it in chord mode. You can use it with Roman numeral spelling or jazz chord spelling. You can also use it in scale mode. I also like to use Zoom's annotation function on top of it, so I can write out specifically my whole steps or my half steps. I hope something that I have shared today has been of interest to you and might be helpful in your own teaching, whether it be ear training or in your private studio. On this list is the link to the YouTube video that I made using OBS project, Open Broadcast Software project, as well as Classroom Maestro, and some of the YouTube videos I used. My flowcharts can be downloaded from my webpage, brandonbascom.com/handouts. And with that, I will pass it back to Bill.
Thank you very much for listening today. We truly enjoyed putting this presentation together for you. And just a final thought, if we as educators are going to focus on the student, truly a student-centered form of education, we really need to be teaching in a pluralistic manner so we can reach our students on as many different levels as possible. So we invite you to think about how you can teach in a multidimensional way, whether it's oral skills or whatever subject it is that you're teaching. So thank you for listening.